Hey, I'm Kathleen from Katalytic Empowerment. And as a parent, I started working with my own kids 20 plus years ago on character development, along with many other things, of course, and have worked with many kids and parents since then. So let's start with a question. Do you think of your child as a human being or human doing? Kind of an odd question, right? Probably not one you've thought of before. Do you think of your kids as human beings or human doings? Let's unpack this a bit and see how this ties into our discussion on building character and self-worth in our kids. But before we get over to our kids, let's think about ourselves. Do we as parents tie our identity to what we do as a person, employee, parent, spouse, rather than who we are, our being? Are our actions, behavior, what we do, where we get our self-worth? My previous boss of a small leadership development company would always say, we are human beings, not human doings. I had never heard that before. Had you? Wow. Talk about shifting the mindset of a doer fixer like me. Too often, people think of themselves and others as human doings, and thus attach any failed outcome to their identity as a person and to their innate worth as a human being, as opposed to attaching it to where it belongs, to the behavior, to how they accomplished a task, or perhaps they were trying to experiment or giving something a try and learning from it. This is something that each of us has to examine for ourselves to determine if we may need to shift our mindset. To take that a step further, we also want to look at how we interact with our kids and ensure that we don't inflict the human doing paradigm on them. If we can separate how well our kids do something from their identity and their being, and thus allow our kids to separate how well they do something from their identity and their being, it will free up their energy to see failure as a key to learning, growing, innovating. We don't want them to grow up to be afraid to try because we were on their case about things that they didn't do right, especially if they were trying. You may have heard of the expression, fail forward fast. It's a great one to keep around, and it just means learn by doing. Learn and keep going so you can advance whatever it is you're working on. Sara Blakely, the founder of Spanx, talks about trying to fail and how her dad instilled this concept in her and her siblings when they were growing up. The premise was, if you're not failing, you're not trying. If you're not failing, you're not growing. He actually asked his kids every day when they got home from school, what did you fail at today? So keep that in mind. When my oldest was real young, I read a book called How to Talk to Kids So They'll Listen and Listen to Kids So They'll Talk by Faber and Maslish. You may have read it as well. I was struck so strongly by something from that book that it helped shape how I raised my kids. It's the concept of not saying, good girl, to my daughter when she did something well or that I approved of. Have you been there? I hear so many parents say, good girl or good boy when their child does something well. And honestly, I would have too if I hadn't read this book. The concept that I was struck with is to focus on the behavior or action of the child and say things like, good job picking up your toys, or good job eating all your peas, or thank you for doing what I asked you to do so quickly. That's called being obedient. Using very clear words and associating them with where the goodness really lies. That way we aren't tying the goodness that we're commending our kids for to their being by saying good girl, but we're attaching it to their action or their behavior. And on the flip side, saying bad girl for not obeying or not eating all their meal or not cleaning up her stuff would signal that she as a person was bad for not doing those things. But that isn't the case. The behavior might be subpar, but she as a person isn't. And we don't want to crush our child's self-worth. If this is something that resonates with you, there's no better time than now to get started. So as a resource, I've linked below a great list of positive words for helping you describe your child's behavior, character, or actions rather than their being or identity. For example, decisive, determined, persistent. You were so persistent in getting that puzzle put together and it paid off. Good job. Or other words like reliable, wise, patient. You were very patient in waiting for me to get off the phone instead of interrupting. I really appreciate that. This could really help to communicate what you're trying to say more accurately, build character, and separate their self-worth from their goodness or badness of their behavior or their actions. I've used this list many, many times over the years since my kids were real little, so I hope it's helpful to you. And believe me, I occasionally caught myself saying, good girl, or the flip side at times, because that's kind of how I was raised. But it was mainly in the beginning before I started to gain more experience and fluency with the words and expressions that I could use, and with changing my mindset from seeing my kids as human beings rather than human doings. So grab that resource below. Check out my Money Smart Kids videos for more on developing character by getting paid for some of their work or chores and making some financial decisions with their own earnings, and all the valuable lessons in character that can be derived from that process. Until next time, take care.